Hey everyone, welcome to the Wednesday One Thing. Every Wednesday, someone from the ClearBank team comes forward and presents a interesting development in the world of e-commerce and how that impacts the lives and businesses of small and medium-sized e-commerce brands every single day. So this week, Maury and I will be discussing some very important developments in the world of e-commerce and marketing, as well as touching upon some hot developments and getting some fiery hot takes from Maury on what he makes of it. So, hey Maury, I hope you're well.
Yeah, man, doing great. Another beautiful day in quarantine.
Yeah, had 105 of those at this point, so getting used to that. Awesome. So I'll begin, and I'll begin by touching on the most obvious development in e-commerce and online ads in the past week. Kind of impossible to not mention this or not be affected by this if you work in e-commerce. And that's really touching on the ad boycott that some brands are placing on Facebook for the month of July. So I guess just a quick background on what's happening. So Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's, North Face are among the biggest names to temporarily pause ads on Facebook till the end of July as part of a coordinated campaign to pressure the social media giant to crack down on misinformation amid nationwide civil rights protests and the lead up to the 2020 US election. So some interesting facts to sort of put around here. Now, Facebook brought in $17 billion in ad revenue in Q1 of 2020. So what's really interesting to see is where these companies end up, I beg your pardon, after July and heading into the busiest season of the year for e-commerce, obviously towards Black Friday, Cyber Monday, which also coincides with the US elections. So if anything, the pressure and I guess the conversation about this campaign on Facebook will only increase as we get closer to the busiest part of the year. Now, the National Post noted this morning in an article it published that for years, Facebook has been the target of politicians and nonprofit groups seeking to challenge the company's power over user data and speech content. But despite previous ad boycott efforts and a delete Facebook hashtag trend online in early 2018, Facebook's revenue and user growth numbers have never seriously been impacted by user or advertiser protests. So since 2016, when Facebook's policies became the center of debate, the social network's revenue has jumped by 150% to more than $70 billion in 2019, and their share price is closed at an all-time high, I think, last week. So super interesting to discuss and really try to figure out what will be the impact of the Facebook ad boycott on small and medium-sized businesses. Now, Facebook alone accounts for about 24%, so that's a quarter of the entire US digital ad market. And almost 76% of Facebook ad revenue comes from small and medium-sized businesses. Again, the National Post in their article this morning wrote that small businesses are unlikely to leave Facebook and they bring the bulk of their ad revenue. So it's important to note that according to one report in campaign, Facebook and Instagram are now their ad prices are now back at pre-lockdown levels. And last week, prices were actually higher than in early March by about 5%. So, although it's too early to say if prices will stay at that level, consumers, they increased their use of digital platforms during the crisis, but a collapse in demand for brand ads across all platforms led to an overall fall in prices for digital ad inventory. Now, as we head into July, which is from an e-commerce perspective, not the busiest part of the year. This is not the peak of the e-commerce season by any means, although sales are of course very high for summer-oriented brands. Super interesting to think about what the impact of this will be on Facebook ad prices. They are rising back to their pre-lockdown levels, but now we also have some major players pulling out and boycotting Facebook ads. While at the same time, Facebook doesn't really rely on those major players. Their bulk comes from those small and medium-sized businesses who are who find Facebook to be a very essential platform for customer acquisition for their direct-to-consumer platforms. So, Maury, would love to get some of your thoughts on this and really what you think, or whether or not July boycotts will keep Facebook ad prices lower and what the impact of this might be on small businesses.
Well, Hamza, I think ultimately what you mentioned about the fact that the majority of the revenue comes from small businesses is telling as to what the impact this is going to ultimately have on Facebook. For the companies that are participating in this, namely Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's, North Face, I think this move is just very on brand for them. They've historically participated in things that their customers believe in. So
Mhm.
I think for them, it's not going to have a big impact to their business, and that is part of the calculation as to say why they're not going to be running their ads on Facebook. And this is not a political thing that we're talking about. It's merely the effect on the ad prices. So the second hand there is that if you think about the ad pricing structure and available ads as sort of like a stock market of assets, if one company isn't going to buy a valuable ad, that just leaves opportunity for someone to step in and buy that underpriced asset. So the most similar thing I can think of is a lot of people who have very they want to perhaps invest with their morals, so they won't buy high dividend paying tobacco stocks. So that means they have to sell that stock if it's in their portfolio, and someone on the other end will happily buy it. That's pretty much what I think about this situation, which is that if a bunch of people really do want to boycott Facebook, which in most people's estimation is the biggest show in town for online ads, then there's a
Mhm.
handful of other people who would love to step in and purchase those undervalued assets. So what I think is going to have the impact is really negligible, if anything. Facebook won't necessarily feel this. If anything, it will just feel it as a PR play. But
Mhm.
for small and medium sized businesses that really rely on Facebook as their customer acquisition channel, if you can buy ads at a cheaper cost, then that's what they're going to do.
100%. That makes a lot of sense. And again, something that's interesting is that for many of the smaller media buyers, the first they heard about the boycott was from Facebook itself. So Facebook actually reached out to its media partners last week in an email acknowledging the boycott, highlighting the work Facebook is doing around identifying misinformation using algorithms and defending I guess the integrity of news available on the website. um, and and so that's really been the approach that Facebook has had. They've not really shied away from this. And for companies that spend tens of millions of dollars per year on Facebook ads instead of hundreds of millions, so sorry, the media buyers that spend tens of millions instead of hundreds of millions, um, that's a really important move to play because they're very, very, for them and for their clients, Facebook and Instagram and Facebook social media platforms are an absolutely essential part of their business growth strategy. And this is only going to become more important going into, towards November, which happens to be Black Friday and the election. So super interesting times in that regard, just to see like which direction ad prices go in, how many other major players who may not necessarily need Facebook, quote unquote, need Facebook, how they're going to behave closer to Black Friday, Cyber Monday as the year goes on, and I guess the wider debate, which is obviously a political debate, just becomes even more heated and becomes a bigger center of conversation, as the months progress.
Like, if I may just interject one more time here, I think really we're kind of going through this perfect storm with e-commerce where you're right, the biggest time is going to be around Cyber Monday or Black Friday, that time period. But we've just seen so much acceleration in the space.
Hmm.
So every month could be as big as Black Friday, which just means some some people have said if they are buying on behalf of their clients, that some of their companies are just getting back to profitability. They're
Hmm.
not going to shy away from Facebook ads. They're going to double down on what's working because they have clients to appease, and they want to make sure that they're getting their return. So again, if they find an underpriced asset, they're absolutely going to buy it.
100%, 100%. So now, Maury, let's move on to a couple of other topics that I had in mind to discuss. I'm just going to tell you what's happened, and then I'd love to get your hot takes on what that really means. So the first development that I'm super excited about is that Spotify is testing in-app offers, which is an interactive ad format for podcasts. This was in TechCrunch earlier this week, and to give you a bit of a preamble, now everyone who's ever heard a podcast is kind of used to our favorite podcast creators spelling out a website, www dot, and then the spelling, and then that's because that's where they want us to go to redeem the promo code or show a specific website that they've been sponsored by. So we've all heard sponsored ads on Spotify podcasts, and it is a bit of a cumbersome process because it sort of leaves up way too much for the consumer to then do. You got to pause your podcast, then you got to look up the website, and then it's a very disjointed process. And so Spotify's come up with something that I think is super smart uh, and super easy. So essentially what's happening now is that they're introducing an in-app option that will basically allow listeners to click through an offer to redeem the coupon or special deal from their sponsors. And it'll redirect you to your browser and to the advertiser's landing page, where you can immediately redeem your coupon or your promo code. Um, Super easy, super straightforward. It's come along after a long-ish time, considering how long podcasts have found Spotify to be absolutely essential. But a really interesting and cool development. Would love to get some of your thoughts on what's happened there.
Yeah, I've listened to podcasts for a while now. I'm definitely not someone who picked it up when it was a very indie platform and people were putting it out, but I have witnessed it through the monetization phase of it. And absolutely what they're saying and what you're saying about the clunky experience about advertising and collecting that website and the promo code is very clunky. I don't use Spotify as a podcast platform, but I imagine that having in-app, quote unquote, in-app purchases or in-app directs will have a very good impact for advertisers on that platform. And that's just because the way people listen to podcasts and the way I listen to podcasts is usually while I'm doing something else. And my first instinct is not to it's not to go and type in this URL while I'm listening to the podcast. I'll usually, if any, I would do that afterwards. So having that easy and seamless experience right in the podcast is really a game changer. And again, it's just another avenue for people to have more engaging content. Spotify, if you've been following what they've been up to in podcasts, they're just on a tear, and they've really doubled down on their podcast avenue with acquiring the Joe Rogan show, with a few years ago acquiring Gimlet. So they're producing podcasts, they're monetizing podcasts. People are listening to podcasts more and more as an audio platform. And I think this is amazing for both Spotify and for anyone, small businesses who want to advertise, and also consumers who want to be able to redeem products in an easier fashion.
100%, 100%. I totally agree with you when you say that most people listen to podcasts while doing something else. That is almost certainly how our podcast will be listened to as well. And that obviously means that ads on podcasts need to be presented in a different way, and should be able to be accessed in a different way. I just think that for the average listener, having that in-app option of just clicking something, going straight to the website, being able to purchase something, makes it a lot more like a traditional, paid ad experience that most companies use to acquire customers. And for example, in our case, the vast majority of the use of our capital tends to go towards things like Facebook and Google and online ads. And the way that e-commerce brands, for example, track their return on ad spend, track their customer acquisition, track their clicks, is just made so much easier by offering an in-app purchase option or in-app coupon redemption option within the Spotify app. So I think it's a pretty big game changer. I think it's going to make Spotify a much more reliable player in the online ad market, something we were already talking about. It's something completely dominated by Facebook and Google. And I'm not saying this is going to change everything, but it's obviously a step in a brighter direction as far as Spotify's ad ambitions are concerned.
Yeah, my hot take on that, it's going to make them a boatload of money, because advertisers at least will love that format, especially now that they'll be able to track uses and views on the coupon. Whereas if you just throw out a URL and tell the host to read it out, much harder to track who's watching that, who's redeeming it. So this is a big win.
100%, 100%. And our final topic for the day, super quick piece of news from across the pond, which is that in the UK, 63% of shoppers feel comfortable to visit stores again. So UK consumers have become increasingly comfortable with buying groceries and other items in store after retailers opened shops this week, and at least 63% of consumers felt comfortable buying groceries in store, compared to 51% at the beginning of May. And for non-groceries, the figure rose to 41% in June versus 25% the previous month. So overall, strong rebound in terms of the in-store brick and mortar purchases that consumers are making. Yeah, fire away your thoughts.
Look, Hamza, I'm not a fear monger. I'm not going to say I haven't been to a store. Obviously, I wear a mask whenever I go out, just for my safety and everyone else's safety. The only time I have been in a store has either been to get a beer or get some wine or to get groceries. I have not stepped into a retail store since March. I think maybe since February. So my hot take on this is, you know, I think people should probably stay at home, do as little shopping as possible. E-commerce has shown that we can sustain ourselves digitally for the time being, and I don't know what people are racing to get back to. This thought of going into a mall or the thought of going into a retail store just rubs me the wrong way. If people are doing it, that's their prerogative. But my hot take would be, we've done it for the past 3 months. We can weather it a little bit. People going back is, I guess, a sign of confidence, but I think we should still be just trying to social distance, right?
100%. Maury, always a pleasure getting your thoughts and getting a uh, more robust understanding or opinions on the developments around us in the world of e-commerce, and more specifically what that means for the founders within the Clearbank community as well. So pleasure speaking with you today, and
Not a problem, man. Thoughts and opinions are definitely our own, but thanks so much for the conversation, man.
100%, 100%. Likewise.